Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we've got a whole stack of sources in front of us, articles, public health reports, expert guidelines. But we're not using them to, debate policy or anything like that. We're diving into something much more practical. The fundamental, absolutely essential skills of first aid and CPR training. This isn't just theory. This is knowledge that is quite literally life-altering.
That really is the core of it, isn't it? The information here, it's not meant to just be passively consumed. It really demands action. We want to go beyond the usual public service announcement to really understand the stats, the skills, and maybe most importantly, how accessible this training actually is.
Exactly. So our mission for you is simple. We want you to walk away from this deep dive completely convinced you need these skills. And even more than that, armed with the exact knowledge of where to go to get them. This is, well, it's the ultimate prepared mindset. And it all has to start with the urgency.
Okay, let's unpack this because we have to begin with a statistic that I found, well, frankly, just devastating. It's pulled directly from the American Heart Association, and it's about cardiac arrest that happens outside of a hospital. Nearly 90% of people who suffer this, they die.
90%. That is a number you have to just stop and absorb for a second. And you have to ask why. Why is it so incredibly severe? And it's not just about the medical event itself. It's a direct reflection of time and inaction.
Right, because most of these things happen at home or in public, and I think the assumption is always, well, call 911 and the professionals take over.
That's what everyone thinks. But the sources are crystal clear on this. The real problem is the gap. The gap between the person collapsing and the arrival of professional help, of EMS. So even in a city with great services, there's always that lag time.
Exactly. And that gap, can easily be 4, 5, 6 minutes. And those minutes, that's the whole ballgame. That's basically the gold standard for survival without major brain damage. Once you go past that, the prognosis just drops off a cliff. They call it the chain of survival. And the very first link in that chain, it's always the bystander. It's you. You're the only person who can intervene in those first crucial minutes.
So this training, it's not just about some worst-case scenario. It's about fundamentally changing that timeline. It's about making the bystander the single most critical factor in the entire equation.
It is. You're shifting the power. You're bridging that critical time gap until EMS arrives. And the data is just unequivocal on this. Performing immediate CPR, even if you don't do it perfectly, can double or even triple a person's chance of survival.
Double or triple, that's incredible.
Which is why we see this training as not just, a good idea. It's almost mandatory for civic life.
Okay, so if we all agree on the urgency, that you, the listener, are the real first responder, what do you actually need to do? What are the key things to know that give you the biggest impact? And here's where it gets really interesting, because it's so much more than just the CPR we all sort of know about.
It absolutely is. When you look at what's in a modern safety course, it really synthesizes a whole range of skills. From, minor injuries all the way up to these acute, life-threatening events. We can really break it down into 3 major parts that work together.
All right, let's start with that foundation. What's the first thing that prepares someone to act instead of just freezing?
That would be basic first aid. This is the everyday knowledge, the stuff for managing injuries that happen all the time. And it's critical because mastering these smaller things builds the confidence you need when the stakes get higher. We're talking about how to stabilize a broken bone, treat burns, manage severe bleeding, and crucially, how to respond to choking, the Heimlich maneuver.
And that's a huge one. I mean, the difference between a calm response and a panicked one can be seconds. If you have to Google how to do the Heimlich while someone is choking, you've already lost.
Precisely. So once you have that foundation, that confidence, then you can move on to the second module. This is the one that covers those immediate life-saving techniques. We call it advanced emergency response.
Okay, so this is the famous stuff. This is the CPR and AED training.
Correct. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation and the automated external defibrillator. Now, what's interesting in the source material is this shift in how CPR is taught. There's a growing prominence of hands-only CPR.
Tell me more about that. Why hands only? What's the thinking there?
Well, the biggest barrier to someone helping in an emergency is hesitation. And a lot of that hesitation was tied to a reluctance about doing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. So studies show that for adults, in those first few minutes, just doing rapid, deep chest compressions is just as effective. You're keeping the already oxygenated blood flowing to the brain.
So the takeaway is, if you're not trained or you're unsure, just push hard and fast in the center of the chest.
Yes, that one action is infinitely better than doing nothing at all. It's a game changer.
That's a huge simplification. It removes a major psychological hurdle for people. And what about an AED? We see those boxes everywhere now.
The AED training is vital because the devices themselves are so simple. They're designed for the public.
Hmm.
It talks to you. It gives you voice prompts. It won't deliver a shock unless it detects that it's needed. The training just makes you faster. You know how to place the pads correctly, how to make sure the area is clear. You don't hesitate. You just open the box and go.
Okay, so we have basic first aid for injuries, then the hands-on skills like CPR and AED for a cardiac crisis. What's the third piece of the puzzle? You mentioned it's often overlooked.
It is, and it's identification and assessment. This might be the most crucial early skill. It's being able to recognize the signs and symptoms of major events like a heart attack or a stroke, because the treatment windows for these are incredibly narrow.
Can you give us an example? How does identifying it correctly change what you do?
Of course, take a stroke. If you can spot the signs, and there's a great acronym, FAST, facial drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty, time to call 911. If you spot that, you trigger specialized medical care immediately. Those patients can get powerful clot-busting drugs, but only within a very short time frame. If you delay that call by even an hour because you weren't sure what you were seeing, their chance of a full recovery just plummets. Knowing when to make that specific call is sometimes more important than knowing how to apply a bandage.
So it's not just about doing, it's about knowing what you're looking at in the first place. That's a really important distinction. Before we move on, I want to touch on something that always comes up, the fear of being sued, the fear of liability.
An excellent point. And it's a huge part of the mental toolkit. The sources are very clear. Nearly every state, every jurisdiction has what are called Good Samaritan laws. These laws are specifically designed to protect you, a bystander, when you provide reasonable emergency assistance.
That's incredibly reassuring. So the training gives you the skills, and the law gives you the safety net to actually use them.
Precisely. It removes one more reason to freeze when you're faced with that kind of chaos. And if we connect all of this whole toolkit, to the bigger picture, the sources really emphasize that this knowledge isn't locked away in some expensive, specialized place. The whole system for getting this training out there relies heavily on community infrastructure.
Which is a huge takeaway for you, the listener. The sources are definitive on this. This knowledge is accessible. The old barriers like cost or, where do I even go? Those have largely been removed.
The knowledge is just out there for the taking. We can even detail the most common places you can start looking for training, like today.
Let's do it. So first, the big one is probably the American Red Cross or similar national groups in other countries. That's the formal certified path, right? If you need a card for your job or something.
That's the one. But don't stop there. Look locally. Your local police or fire departments are often these unsung heroes of public training. They have a vested interest in a safer community, and they'll often hold free or very low-cost CPR classes.
And what about hospitals? They seem like an obvious resource.
Absolutely. Hospitals and major medical centers often have huge community outreach programs. They might run specific workshops on just using an AED or recognizing a stroke. They're leveraging their expertise directly for the public.
So we have the Red Cross, local firemen, police, hospitals.
And then there's a kind of catch-all.
Yeah.
Other community groups. Think about your workplace, your gym, a church, or a community center. These places often host or sponsor training events for their members. The main takeaway here is just proximity and affordability.
It really sounds like there's no excuse. You don't have to sign up for some massive, expensive program. You can probably find a free workshop just by checking your local fire department's website. The path is short, it's clear, and it's probably right around the corner.
That is the high-value proposition.
Yep.
There really is no good geographic or financial reason to put this off. The information is out there just waiting for you.
So what does this all mean? When we boil it down, we started with that absolutely shocking reality, the nearly 90% fatality rate for cardiac arrests outside of a hospital. And we've detailed the core training, basic first aid, advanced CPR and AED skills, and those vital identification skills.
It means that being prepared is power. It really is. Being trained shifts you from being a passive, helpless observer in an emergency to being the person who can actually start the chain of survival. It can become the difference between a tragic outcome and a survivable one.
It's the ultimate empowerment. So given that stark number we started with, that 90% fatality rate, we want to leave you with one last thing to think about. If you're in a crowded room and someone collapses and you are the single person there who has been trained, what is your moral and civic obligation? Think about how having this knowledge completely changes your mental calculation in an emergency. If you're the one person who knows how to act, what's the real cost of hesitation? Go find that training.